Welcome to The Explainer. Sometimes a single signature can change the world. Today, we're looking at one of those moments from October 1947 when the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir signed a document to join India. But that signature, well, it didn't solve a crisis. Instead, it lit the fuse on one of the longest and most complicated conflicts in modern history. So that's the big question, right? How on earth did one piece of paper do so much damage? Well, to really get it, we need to jump right into the middle of the action, into the absolute chaos of October 1947. Because what happened in those few frantic days set the stage for everything that followed. So, picture this. The British have just partitioned India, and it's total chaos. The ruler of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, is stuck right in the middle. He's a Hindu ruler in a state with a Muslim majority, and he's got the two brand new nations of India and Pakistan breathing down his neck. His big hope? To somehow stay independent from both. But here's the thing, that dream of independence, it was already falling apart. The state wasn't just facing external pressure, it was rotting from the inside. There were rebellions popping up, like the big Punch uprising led by ex-soldiers. The Maharaja's grip on his own kingdom was just slipping away. And then things went into overdrive. On October 22nd, thousands of Pashtun tribal fighters pour in from Pakistan, and they're moving fast towards the capital, Srinagar. Just 3 days later, the Maharaja's forces are completely overrun, and he has to flee the city. By the 26th, his dream of independence is dead. He has one last, desperate move. He begs India for military help. So, the Maharaja asks India for help, right? But India's leadership, including the Governor-General Lord Mountbatten, didn't just say yes. They came back with a huge condition, a deal breaker. They made it crystal clear. We can't send our army into a foreign country. If you want our help, Kashmir has to legally be part of India. First, you sign, then we send troops. And that ultimatum, it all came down to one single piece of paper, the Instrument of Accession. Now, on the surface, this was a standard legal document. The Maharaja was the ruler, he had the authority to sign, and in doing so, he'd hand over power for just 3 things: defense, foreign affairs, and communications. Everything else would stay under his control. Okay, and this is where the story just splits into 2 completely different realities depending on who you ask. The very invasion that forced the Maharaja's hand is seen in totally opposite ways. India's position has always been that this was a full-on invasion, secretly backed by Pakistan to grab Kashmir by force. But Pakistan's narrative is that it was just a spontaneous uprising, with tribesmen rushing to help their fellow Muslims who were being attacked. So, you see, the controversy around that one signature is a complete mess. It's a whole tangle of questions that have never been fully answered. First, can you even have a valid signature when it's made under the threat of invasion? Was it signed under duress? Then there's the timing issue. To this day, people argue about whether the paper was signed before or after Indian troops had already landed. And maybe the biggest question of all, was this deal meant to be final, or was it just a temporary fix? And that last point, the one about it being temporary, is absolutely crucial. Because in the very letter that Lord Mountbatten sent accepting the accession, he dropped in a political bombshell. He said that once the fighting stopped, the final decision should be made by the people themselves, through a vote, a plebiscite. And right there you have the core of the problem, a legally binding document on one hand and a political promise for a popular vote on the other. It's a contradiction that's never been resolved. Okay, so to really understand why this whole kingdom was so fragile, why it was on the verge of collapse in 1947, we have to jump in a time machine. We need to go back a full century, because the weakness wasn't just from 1947, it was literally built into the foundations of the state itself. And when you look back, what you find is pretty startling. The state of Jammu and Kashmir, it wasn't some ancient, organic kingdom that grew over centuries. Not at all. It was, as the sources call it, a colonial construct, an artificial creation pieced together by the British for their own strategic reasons after they defeated the Sikh Empire. This invention was made official in 1846 with a document called the Treaty of Amritsar, and you could almost think of it less like a treaty and more like a business deal. Basically, the British won the war, and as part of the spoils, they sold the beautiful Kashmir Valley to a local Dogra ruler from Jammu, a guy named Gulab Singh, who had played his cards right and helped them out. And I'm not kidding when I say it was a business deal. We're talking about an actual price tag. Gulab Singh paid the British 75 lakh rupees. He literally bought himself a kingdom. Yeah, I mean, this quote just absolutely nails it. The treaty transformed sovereignty into a commercial transaction. It wasn't about building a nation. It was about treating land and the millions of people living on that land as transferable property, just like you'd sell a house. So what kind of state do you actually get from a real estate deal? Well, you get something that's been sort of smashed together, a forced merger of three incredibly different worlds that had no real reason to be a single country. I mean, just look at how these three pieces came together. You've got Jammu, which was a collection of Hindu principalities, and it was given to the Dogras as a grant. Then you have the Kashmir Valley, a historic Muslim-majority cultural center, which was bought. And finally, you have Ladakh, a completely distinct Buddhist kingdom in the Himalayas, which was taken by pure military conquest. Grant, purchase, conquest. Three separate places, three separate histories, all forced under one crown. So you have this forced marriage, right? And no surprise, it never had the consent of the people living there. It had no shared identity, no common history to hold it together. The sources call this a deep structural fragility. And what that really means is that the entire state was built on a shaky foundation from the very first day. It was an accident waiting to happen. All right, so let's bring it all together. How does a shaky foundation from the 1800s lead directly to the crisis of 1947? Well, the collapse wasn't some random event. It was the inevitable end for a state that was, frankly, fragile by design. So when you boil it all down, you're really left with two huge foundational problems. Think of them as the two original sins of the conflict. First, you have the crisis of creation back in 1846, a state that was manufactured for cash with no input from its people. And then a century later, you get the crisis of accession, a decision about its future made not with careful thought, but in a moment of sheer panic and collapse. Tracing that line from a business deal in 1846 to a signature under duress in 1947, that's really the key to understanding the incredible complexities of Kashmir today. And it leaves you with one big, really tough question. For a state that was born from a colonial deal and whose future was decided in a moment of crisis, was a peaceful future ever really possible? Was conflict in some way inevitable from the start?